Let's implement our first function. It's going to be a very simple one that copies a vector to another vector. We're going to implement it using mscript, which is the language that Matlab uses. Now realize that I'm making this video as the materials are still under construction, so it may all look slightly different from what I'm showing, but you'll get the gist of it. So let's get started on the first programming assignment, which is to create a function in mscript that copies one vector to another. We have rather detailed instructions for this, so if you go to the notes and you find this homework and you click on LAFF programming supplement, you will get there. And it'll look something like this. Now, what I want you to do is to start up Matlab. And what you will see is something like this. And you may have to navigate to the particular subdirectory that has the programming assignments in it. We talked about that in week 0. And to do so, you may have to browse for the folder to get there. Anyway, let's instead start right here. Now the instructions say to start by creating two vectors x and y. So let's go to Matlab, and in the command window, which is this window right here, let's create a vector x, 1, 2, 3, and a vector y, 0, minus 1, minus 2. And you can always look at the contents of vectors x and y again by just saying x, and it'll print it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to back up these vectors. So we're going to say x old is equal to x, and notice that in the process we're copying one vector to another. So in some sense, intrinsic in Matlab is already the ability to assign one vector to another. But we're going to write our own function because we're going to learn from doing so. So we set x old to x, and we can set y old to y. And notice that it's a little annoying that every time the contents are printed, and you can suppress that by putting a semicolon at the end of the line. If we now look at y old, you see that it has the contents of y. Now, to copy one vector to another, what one can do is simply assign an element of x to the corresponding element of y one at a time. Now, to access an element of x, you say x of 1. Okay, now recalling that x is 1, 2, 3, x of 1 is the first element of x. The first element of y has contents 0, because y had contents 0, minus 1, minus 2. And what you notice is that mscript starts indexing at 1, while we would have called y of 1 actually size sub 0 in our notation in our course. And that's just because we choose to start indexing at 0, as computer scientists tend to do, while Matlab start indexing at 1, which is what mathematicians tend to do. Okay, so here we have it. And to now assign the first element of x to the first element of y, we could do this. What you notice is that it's being overwritten. And then we could do the same thing for the second elements and for the third elements. So let's reset y to the original value. Obviously, if these vectors were of length 100, this would have been rather tiresome to do the copy one at a time. And for this, mscript has something that's called a for loop. And what you can say is, for indices I from 1 to 3, set y of I equal to x of I. And then you have to say end, which is the end of the span of the for loop. And what happens is that one by one, the elements of y are overwritten with the corresponding elements of x. Let's reset y to y old. We could have done the same thing, suppressing the printing of the intermediate results by saying y of I is equal to x of I semicolon. And then if we print out y, you see that it has been overwritten. Now again, obviously every time you want to copy one vector into another, it would be a little bothersome to have to write this kind of for loop. And therefore what we're going to do is we're going to create a function. Now to do that, we're going to start by going into subdirectory programming and into subdirectory week 1, which is where we're going to put the files that we're going to create in week 1. And we're going to go up here and say new function. And what we get here is an outline for a function. Notice that it says function, then some output arguments, some name of a function, and then some input arguments. Now the name of the function we're going to choose to be LAFF underscore copy. The input arguments are going to be both x and y. And the output argument is going to be y sub out. And then you really should have some comments here that describe what the function does. Let's save this. And we're going to save this into a file laff underscore copy.m. Notice that that's what the Matlab files have as an ending. And you say save. And now over here we could actually call this function. So let's reset y to be y old. And we could now say, let's assign to y out the copying of x into y, but notice that we're actually saying put the result into vector y out. And actually if we do this, it protests because it says, wait a minute, as part of this function we're saying that we're going to create an output variable y out, and we never assign anything to it, and that just looks a little hokey. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say, let's set y out to be a vector of zeros that are 3 by 1. So we're actually viewing column vectors as 3 by 1 arrays. Let's then assign for I equals 1 through 3 to y out of I the contents of x of I, and end. Now notice we're not even using the input variable y. What's going on with that will become clear as you go through the programming supplement in more detail. Now I like to put a return at the end here to indicate that we are returning from the function. If we now save this, and I'm doing that with Command S, or I can just say save. Then if I now say y out is equal to laff copy x comma y, notice that y out ends up being overwritten with the contents of x. But I could just as easily set y equal to laff copy x comma y, in which case y gets overwritten. Let's reset y to y old. And if we now do this, but we put a semicolon at the end, then notice along the way the intermediate values of y out are being written. And if we then say y, we also see that y has been updated. So what we really want to do here is we want to put a semicolon at the end to suppress the printing of intermediate results. Let's save this. And now what we have is a routine that can copy a vector of length 3 into another vector of length 3. Now obviously we probably want a more general function that can copy a vector of length n into a vector of length n. So let's change this now. Okay, for that we're going to use the mscript function size. If you look at size of x, it tells you that it's a 3 by 1 array. That's because we view a column vector as an n by 1 array. And what we can do is we can extract the first and second dimension of the vector as such. And what that then does is it returns the row and column dimension. And then we can use that in our function by saying, let's let m x nx equal to the size of x, semicolon to suppress printing. Let's let our output vector be of size mx by 1. And then for I equals 1 to m sub x, let's set the ith entry equal to the corresponding entry in x. And if we now save this, then we have a function that can copy in general. Okay, if we now set x equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and we set y equal to 0, minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, and we call the copy routine. Let's see, I'm going up here with the up arrow. Then notice that the vector of length 4 has been copied from x into y. Now, it turns out that we really want a function that can copy a row vector into a column vector, or a column vector into a row vector, etc., etc., etc. And the rest of the programming supplement on this particular homework problem walks you through all of those steps. I'm just going to let you do the rest of that on your own.